to April's interactive webinar for special education surrogate parents, presented by the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. My name is Janie Kreco, and I am the Training and Support Specialist at RTSC. If you are interested in learning more about the Federation, please go to our website at www.fcsn.org and explore all the different programs and training opportunities. Our presenter today is Peggy O'Hare. She is the Program Director of the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center. Peggy has worked at the Federation for over 14 years in various capacities, including trainer of early interventionists and manager of a federally funded program to support family and community engagement in public schools. Our IT people today are John Sullivan and Emily Gaudet. The PowerPoint for this webinar was emailed to all those who registered. Please check your inbox if you have not yet received it. The webinar is being recorded so that those who could not attend can retrieve it on our website at a later date. If you have any questions, please type them into the toolbox to submit them. I will present them to Peggy when appropriate. But please note that the last 30 minutes we will unmute the microphone so everyone can participate in the discussion. Also, for the first time, we will be conducting 3 polls during the webinar to hear answers as to what the audience considers appropriate accommodations for 3 case studies at the end of the presentation. And lastly, please take a few seconds to answer our 3-question survey before you sign off from the webinar this afternoon. Okay, Peggy, welcome.
Thank you, Janie. I'm glad to be spending this lovely afternoon. At least it's lovely here in Boston. Finally, spring is here. And we're talking and going forward with part 2 of the MCAS and focusing today on the parent-guardian report and what that contains and how the information can be supportive of our work in advocating for students who are receiving special education services. Today's webinar, I'm going to spend just a few moments reviewing a little bit about what we talked about in part 1 about a month ago, and taking a closer look page by page at the MCAS Parent-Guardian Report and talking about what pieces of information would be useful to you as special education surrogate parents. Lastly, we're going to spend some time talking about some accommodations, very specifically for students with emotional and social disabilities, talking about whether or not they need accommodations and to what extent kinds of accommodations that they might be useful for them. So let's get started. Quick review. First and foremost, it's important for everybody to realize that all students who attend public school here in Massachusetts need to take the MCAS tests. This is inclusive of students receiving special education services, students with limited English proficiency, students who attend charter schools or innovation schools or pilot schools or collaborative schools, or the old-fashioned term, the approved private Chapter 766 schools. All these students need to take the MCAS. The state is striving to get 100% participation. Schools have to account for why they're not getting 100% participation. There was a question last week about a waiver for students not to take the MCAS. There really isn't any such waiver. There is sort of like an exemption for schools not to report every single score of every single student. This is based on the premise that individual children should not be singled out with their scores when reporting to the general public. So therefore, those schools that have small numbers of students, for example, taking 3rd grade and who are English language learners, if there's a small number of students at a school taking that test and has been identified as an English language learner, they do not necessarily have to report those students' scores to the general public, because that the individual students might be easily identified. So that's the one exception. There really is not a waiver for not taking the MCAS. Okay, MCAS, students with disability, we spent a lot of time talking about how important that is. In terms of, one, the students then have access to the general curriculum. They learn the material that all the other students are learning that are part of the Massachusetts curriculum framework. They participate in the MCAS test with accommodations or without accommodations, which we'll talk about in a minute, or they can take the alternate assessment called MCAS Alt. Okay? This, just to review, 3 ways that students with MCAS can take the MCAS without accommodations, just like all other students. With accommodations, and they are grouped as standard accommodations or non-standard accommodations. The standard, there's a huge list of standard accommodations, and they focus on categories of timing or scheduling for the test, the setting of the test presentation, or in other words, how the student gets directions to take the test, and test response, how the student produces responses. There's standard accommodations, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has it online, the whole complete list, in a document that's called Requirements for the Participation of Students with Disabilities in MCAS, and it is updated periodically. I'm not sure that it's every year, but I do know there is one for the 2012 to 2013 update. It's important to know, to remember that standard accommodations can be used for any student who is on an IEP as long as it's written on the IEP. The non-standard accommodations, those accommodations can be used but need to have prior permission. So the school has to contact the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed and say that they want to use these non-standard accommodations for a specific student. And lastly, the third way is using the alternate, portfolio format. And we talked quite a bit about it, and if you remember last time, Laura talked about how her daughter had used both standard, non-standard, and the portfolio throughout her educational career. So it's kind of interesting and not locked into one for one student all the time. It can change, and the way to change that is to put it in the IEP, and that's really very important, or the 504 plan. It's very important to remember that it must be written in. And the student must be using those accommodations prior to the test. Okay? All right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty of today's presentation, and that is taking a look at the MCAS Parent Guardian Report. I did this seminar in person, I think it was probably in November or December, and I was surprised at the show of hands of people when I asked them if they'd seen an MCAS Parent Guardian Report, how many had not seen it for their student as a special education surrogate parent. It's very important that all special ed surrogate parents get these reports. These come out kind of like a delayed fashion, and that's kind of maybe why people forget about it. Sometimes the students take the tests in the springtime. They're in the midst of taking the 2013 MCAS test right now. It starts in March, and it probably doesn't finish until around May. The scores are then tabulated and analyzed during the summer months, and it is not until September and sometimes even early October that the MCAS Parent Guardian reports are available to parents and special education surrogate parents. So there's that delay, and that sometimes is confusing. We're going to take a look at the 4 pages that an MCAS Parent Guardian Report look like. It's interesting. Emily did help me to get the most current one, which is spring 2012. And this format has not changed over the past maybe 2 or 3 years. There for a while it was changing every year and was very confusing. But right now they've kept it the same. Now, just when we know what it is and it's been the same, it may change because the testing format is going to be changing in the near future when the state starts using the Common Core standards, which we talked about last year. So let's go right to page 1. And this is just an informational page, and there's always a letter from the commissioner, and he describes about what's going to be in there in the rest of the pages, and please contact him and his department if you have any questions. The box at the bottom of this page really talks about why we have these MCAS tests and what are the results used for. It's very interesting because they emphasize that it evaluates both the student and the school's performance. It holds the schools and districts accountable, and it helps them, the schools and districts, to improve the curriculum and the instruction. Remember, in the 5-step standard-based education process, after step 4 when test, you got to then change the instruction to help increase performance, and that's step 5. Lastly, it also, for 10th grade students, it determines whether or not they're eligible for graduation and also some of the scholarships that are available here in Massachusetts. Page 2 is kind of the meat of the matter, actually. It is where you find out how the students scored, both the performance levels and the growth percentile. And I'm going to talk about both of those. This, what you have in front of you, is actually from 2010. The reason I included this one is because you actually see some scores. On the Department of Elementary and Secondary website, you can search for MCAS Parent Guardian Report, and you will find templates for this current year, and they are in English as well as in many other languages, which is many times helpful for parents who don't speak English. They will get the report in English, but if they have the template in their native language, they can understand it a bit better. So that's a hint for schools to use that. This one is for a 10th grade student who also took the biology test. And so if you take, let me see if I can get my pointer working here. Here we go. You can see in the English language arts, this student got a 234, which is in the needs improvement category. If I'm going to just flip to one slide right here, just to remind you of the scale scores. And advanced is 260 or higher, proficient 240 or higher, needs improvement 220. And the last category is warning for all the students except for 10th graders, then it's a failing, and that's lower than 220. So back to page 2. This student got a 234 in English language arts, which means needs improvement category, and the student, as explained here on this page, needs to, I'm trying to get, there we go. Here it is, 234. This student needs to have an EPP, an educational proficiency plan written for that student, okay? In mathematics, however, I don't know why my clicker is kind of fading in and out on me here. This student scored 242, so that's in the proficiency level. And so this student met the requirements for graduation in mathematics. And biology, if you look, that student scored 264, advanced. Something about biology the student really liked, and that could possibly be the hands-on nature of biology, interested in it in particular. Just really kind of an interesting profile, academic profile of the student. All right. These scaled scores, and I'm just going to show you the bar graph on the right, are repeated here for mathematics, English language arts, and I think you can see biology. Is that there too? I have, okay. Not on my screen. That's okay. All right. So what you see over here, and this is kind of really cool, that you see the student score for 2008, 2 years previous, 2009, and 2010. They scored 220, 230, and 234 in English language arts. So you can see a steady improvement, which is really very terrific. This year's report would have 2010, 2011, and 2012 scores. It goes back 2 years, okay? And so you can see the student has been making steady improvement in English language arts, and take a look at math. Went from 220 to 230 to 242, which is terrific. What's not real clear in this particular chart is, what's this little thing right over here? What does that mean? All that is on the current score for 2010 in this report. Okay, the student scored 242, and all that means is it is possible that the student could have scored a little bit lower than 242 or a little bit higher than 242 if in fact the student took this test again. Okay, shows you the little bit of range. All right. So I think this is really very helpful information for any parent, surrogate parent, to take a look at to see how that student has been doing over time. There is another piece of data that helps you learn how the student did over time, and that's called the growth percentile. And that's, I'm taking you back to the boxes on the left where it says growth percentile 45, growth percentile 45. Okay, let's talk about what that means. Let's see where we go with that. Okay, here's the scores again. All right. Okay, what is a student growth percentile? The state has been doing student growth percentiles probably for about 3-4 years. They've been reporting it to parents 3 years. They've been doing it for about 4 years. And what it is to take a look how the student has been learning, how the student has been growing over time. And the comparison is with other students who are called academic peers. And what that means is they're taking a look at how this individual student did compared to other students who scored exactly the same as they did in the previous 2 years. Okay? So if we go back to this student, if you remember, there were 220s, then 230, and then they really increased. So this student was in a cohort of other students who scored 220, 230. And what they did was then to say, okay, this year, how did this student do in comparison to all the others in the cohort? Well, this student did pretty well. They scored at the 45 percentile. That means 55% scored above this student and 45 below. Okay? This rate of change is expressed as the student growth percentile. What's the difference between the actual achievement and this growth percentile? Well, the scale scores, remember those are the 234, the 242, the 260. Those scale scores are absolute measures. Okay, and what that means is that students' learning is compared to a standard. And what you're trying to do is to get all students to be at the highest level possible. So the more students who are at 260, the better. So we're looking at a comparison to an actual learning of the standard. Okay? Whereas the growth percentiles, those are relative measures. Those are comparison over time. It's not a one-shot deal. It's over time. And it's a comparison to others who are learning at the same rate previously. So there is a little bit of a difference there. Okay? And an important difference for us who are advocating for students who are on IEPs, taking a look if the student has taken the regular MCAS with accommodations or without accommodations, and they've taken it for more than 1 year, they should have student growth percentiles. So you can see how that student is learning. They may be achieving at a low level, but they may be learning at a faster rate because of the support that they're getting. Okay, so that's helpful information. Okay, page 3. And this is kind of the interesting part. I broke it up into 2 parts. This is the template without any numbers in it. This is where it's a comparison of the individual students' scaled scores to other students both in the school, in the district, and in the state. So typically what you see is, if this was filled out for your child, there'd be a check that your student scored in the advanced, proficient, needs improvement, or the warning failing. There'd be just a check there, okay? And again, this student has science and technology because it took biology. So for this student, it would be needs improvement in English language art, proficient in math, and would have advanced over here in biology, okay? Here's the comparison part. What you'll see if it was complete, and this would be for every student who attends that school, this high school, you would see the percentage number right in this big box of students in that school who were either proficient or advanced. You'd see a number of how many percentage number needs improvement and how many were in the warning or the failing. Okay? The same would be of the district. Okay, so if there were 2 high schools or more in the district, here we go, that number would be here. If it's only 1 high school in the district, it would be the same number, okay, each case. The state, this is on every student's MCAS parent guardian report. It's the same, it's for every student in the state. So you'd see the state numbers across the boards, okay? You, as a parent and a special education surrogate parent, you have an opportunity to see how your student does compared to other students in the school, district, and the state. If your student is doing better than a large percent in the school, what's working? What's really working for that child, okay? You'd also have some comments if the student, or if the school rather, is not doing as well as the district or the state. What's going on in the school? What's the school doing to improve these scores, performance for the students in that school and district? Okay? The next part, this is the lower half of page 3, they have the growth percentiles, okay? The growth percentiles range from either 1 to 99. Okay, remember this is a percentile. And the median percentile in the state is always 50. It's how they calculate this, that it's always 50. And so the range from 40 to 60 is a typical range. That's a normal growth percentile. If your student scores between 40 and 60, the student is on target. Okay? Your school is on target. Your district is on target. If it's below 40, like the school is, why is it not, why are the group of students who took this test in this school doing 38%? It's a little below. Then I'd really get worried in this case because in English language arts, the district as a whole is doing at the 34%. Why? Now, there's many, many reasons. Perhaps this is a district that has a large number of students who are new to this country, a large number of English language learners. That's perhaps the case. We also know there's other factors that influence students' performance, such as poverty, such as disabilities. So there's many questions and many reasons, but it's really important for parents and special education surrogate parents to ask why. Why is it different? Why would it be if your child was, say, at a 30% and the school is above 60 and the district is above 60, how come your child is not learning as well as the other students? You can ask those questions. Okay, so that's why this is so important right here, to really look at this information. Okay, part 4, page 4, the analysis of the subcontent areas and individual responses. Now this does vary a little bit each time from year to year and from, say, 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade, depending on the content of each of the tests and depending on the numbers of tests. So this first half really helps to analyze how your student did, the percentage of possible points earned by your student in language, in reading and literature, in composition, both the topic development and the standard English conventions. In composition, which this 10th grader would be have taken, they score both the topic, the content, and then also the grammar and sentence structure, etc. So there would be different points. And if this was completed for your student, you would see percentages here. You can see how your student did. Same is true in math. Here's different content areas, and you could see this. And it's a comparison in this category as well. This, on the bottom of the page, is the actual responses that your students made on the different tests. And there's usually an explanation kind of on the bottom of here what, CT, CC, etc. means. Question number 1, through however many questions there are on each of these tests. If what you sometimes see is just a check, which means your child answered it correctly. If there's an A on a multiple choice question, that means they chose A and it was wrong. Sometimes you see a little 2 numbers, and it might be 3/4 means your student got 3 out of 4 points. Okay, so you can kind of analyze where how your child did. This is really important information for the teachers and administration to really see, is there a trend that last year on the tests, 3rd graders were not doing so well in this particular category and in this particular question. They have an opportunity to look at those questions and to change the curriculum and make sure it's covered in this coming year. So it's real important stuff to look at. All right? Before we start talking about some accommodations, are there any questions that we've gotten, Janie, about some of these things?
Okay, Peggy, no questions have come through yet, and I think probably everybody's waiting to ask at the end because we're opening it up at the end. Either that or you've been very, very good at what you've presented.
I just wanted to take a breath, guys, before I go on. Okay. So, actually, I do want to make one comment about this. I've talked to people, special education surrogate parents. Even I was talking to Laura as we were preparing a month or so ago in talking about this on this webinar. And people say, oh, I don't really look at that because it's so confusing, this MCAS parent guardian report. I hope that by getting some basic information, however briefly, might help you to kind of dig that out for your student and really look at it. If you have questions, places to go to get those questions answered, you can always give us a call. Janie will take the question and probably then pass it on to me. But you can also go to the school and talk to the teacher and to the principals. They have been looking at these results, and they can help you figure this information out and perhaps even give you more information about how the whole school did. And I think that's really very important as well. So I will proceed to the next part because I'm very mindful of the time, and I do want to have an opportunity to really talk about perhaps what is kind of challenging for us as we think about students that we represent as special education surrogate parents who have social and emotional disabilities. What kinds of accommodations or non-accommodations should we be thinking about for our students as they take MCAS? And remember, these accommodations need to be embedded into the IEP. There is a part on the place on the IEP specifically about statewide assessments. And unless those accommodations are put in on the IEP and used prior to the MCAS, they cannot be used. So the week before, You can't just add it in. So it's really very important to stay on top of that. I know many times we might think that these accommodations are working and then discover that your student needs some additional accommodations. And they're happening in the classroom, and that's wonderful, except that we have to remember to write it in the IEP. And you can always amend the IEP so that it is included for the MCAS testing when that happens, okay? I can't stress that enough. So I have some case studies for us to think about, and I have them by name. There's 3 kids, and Jenny has devised a little survey that we're going to ask you, but let me first introduce you to the first child. His name is Devin. He's a 12-year-old, and he's in 5th grade, and he lives in a group home. He does attend the local middle school, but that classroom is essentially a separate classroom, substantially separate classroom for students with social and emotional disabilities. Now, Devin likes to play around with math. He likes math calculations. He likes numbers. He'll say he likes math, but he has difficulties understanding math problems. And he really is not doing it. I mean, he's needs improvement in the math categories. And part of it, the teachers think, is because he's not understanding the math problems. And if you remember last week or last month, we talked about the different kinds of questions that the students have to respond to. And the math questions are quite lengthy in terms of reading and understanding the problems. So that's something for us to kind of really consider and think about. He definitely struggles with reading comprehension. He has scored below, so that's the warning, 220 mark in English language arts, both in 3rd grade and 4th grade, and we need to see how he is. We need to push him forward and try to really help him increase that up into the proficiency level. On the IEP, he does have decoding and modified instruction in English language arts. So it's IEP time for Devin. And what kind of accommodations do we want to see in place for Devin when he takes the MCAS? So,
okay, Peggy, let's see if this is going to work. So can you launch the poll? Oh, there we go. Okay, so everybody, if you could put your answers in, that would be great. And we'll leave the poll up for just a couple of seconds so that we can see what most people's responses are.
Janie, would you go over what those options are on the poll?
Yes.
Just while they're doing it?
Yes. So what if everyone can see them, hopefully, it's asking what you believe are the most appropriate accommodations for Devin, and I've given 3 choices. One is to read the directions aloud, or to repeat the directions, or to highlight the directions. The second option is to test in a small group or individually. The third accommodation would be to read aloud for reading comprehension. So, do we have the poll is open? Half have responded. Okay. I'm not seeing the results here, Emily. You've got it all. And I know some people are typing in. That could depend on how the child learns, and that's true.
Depends on what?
It depends on how the child learns, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. Okay, even for each option. Okay, Peggy, you want to address that?
Sure. All of them, I think, are options to consider for Devin. And whoever said it depends on how he learns, I think that really is a discussion for the team to really talk about how does he learn. Things for us to note is that reading out loud for reading comprehension is a non-standard accommodation. Okay, so that is something for us to really think about as his team. And however, reading out loud the directions and the problems is not a non-standard accommodation. So it is a standard. Am I going too many knots there? It is a standard accommodation, so that can easily be done as long as it's incorporated in the IEP. What was the third one as an option, Jane? Small group. Absolutely something to consider. Typically, MCAS tests are given with all the third graders in their classrooms, and maybe for this student, this separate classroom, I don't know how many students are there. I don't know how many students would be taking exactly the same 5th grade MCAS, because there might be some who are technically taking the 4th grade or the 6th grade, etc. So taking a look at the setting for Devin would be really very important, and maybe he would do better in a smaller setting with just he and the teacher, or a couple of students and the teacher. That may be something to consider. And my suggestion would be to try these out, actually, during the school year for Devin, to see what really works for him. Does he pay attention to the test, to the task at hand? Is he most comfortable in a smaller setting? Does he respond to the directions being read out loud to him, especially in the mathematics? I think all of those would be things to think about. Any others, Jenny, that you thought of?
This is not my area of expertise, but I would say that in order to do an accommodation for Devin, I would probably take a look at the neuropsych if he did have that evaluation, and to see whether or not he does have both disabilities, which is a math disability and a reading comprehension disability, and which is impacting his academic progress more.
Yeah.
In order to put a focus on what kind of accommodation. You can't do more than one accommodation. Is that true, Peggy?
No, you can do more.
So, in other words, you could have him be in a small group.
Yes.
And have the directions read aloud to him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The other thing that I was just thinking about is that sort of like least restrictive environment kind of notion. Let's not give as many all the accommodations at once. Let's see what's the least accommodation that we can give that he would be successful on. So, say for the math problems, I was thinking that maybe it's just highlighting and he could follow that. I don't know if he needs the full-blown reading out loud.
I suppose if you were looking at the scores, how the scores were, if you had the guide, the parent-guardian report, and you could see where, was he improving on the math more than he was improving on the ELA or vice versa, you might be able to kind of put your accommodations into the places where he's going to need it the most. It's kind of an art. I
think so, and then I think also by looking at the MCAS Parent-Guardian report and his profile of what he was successful at, which questions did he get correct and which didn't he, that can also be some clues to the kinds of accommodations he might need as well.
And someone actually wrote in, and I've blocked out who it was, but it could be a working memory problem. If he can't retain the information long enough. That's certainly very true for a lot of kids, especially with math disabilities. They know it in 1 minute and then they lose it in the next. So that's also a very possible reason for why that's happening. And if all accommodations fail, I guess what is the ultimate response to that? They're not going to pass the MCAS, right?
Well, I think you might at some point really think about, does he need to do the MCAS alt? I mean, I think that's also another thing to be really thinking about for this student. And remember, he might do very well with the MCAS alt this year, and then the following year switch back to taking the regular MCAS, or vice versa. I mean, I think you're not locked into one format for this whole his whole career taking MCAS. So you can change accommodations as needed as long as it's in the IEP. Yep.
Okay, so if a student is in the 10th grade, this is a 5th grader, but if a student were in the 10th grade and was consistently failing at his math MCAS, would it be too late to do an alt MCAS?
I think you'd have to talk about it, the IEP, before he takes that, before spring of 10th grade. If a student is consistently failing, you know, and you've tried all the accommodations, maybe it is time for the MCAS alt in that one area. And a student can take the MCAS alt in only one area. It doesn't have to be in both areas.
Okay, good, because that was a question that D. Springer, actually, I put the names back up. So D had asked, can you take an MCAS alt for an area, for example, an ELA, but not for math?
That's correct. You can.
Okay. All right.
Good. So, gang, are we ready to try? I think it's Tiffany is the next one. So here is the 10th grader, and that's, as you all know, is the critical year in terms of passing at the proficient and or advanced level in MCAS, ELA, and math. So here's Tiffany. She's 17 years old. She lives in a residential facility and attends a therapeutic day program, but she wants to go back to public high school. She, especially her senior year, that's what she dreams about. I'm hoping her IMP has objectives for her to achieve that goal. She finds mathematics very challenging and consistently scored in the warning level in math since 3rd grade. So perhaps the response that we just gave might be right here. The IEP includes modified instruction for basic calculations. So launch the survey and see what those choices are. And would you read them?
I will. So the accommodations, again, it's which are most appropriate for Tiffany, that she be tested in a small group individually, that the math formulas are provided for her, or she can use a calculator when it's not the calculator part of the test. So if you could go ahead and put your answers in, I think this is kind of cool. I don't know if everybody else thinks it is, but it's a great way to find out what people, how they feel about these accommodations. And I do have the responses up. How many actually voted that? Oh, 64%. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay. I think the choices again are kind of interesting because some of them are standard and some are non-standard, and I think that is something that as you work with the team to figure out how to best support the student taking the MCAS, you're going to be looking at you know, does standard accommodations, are they sufficient, or do we have to go to the non-standard? The non-standard in these three are the calculator. Using a calculator for the non-calculator part. I mean, there's the mathematics, there's two different kinds of sections, when they can use calculators and one when they cannot. And a non-standard accommodation is to use the calculator even during that time.
I just wanted to say that in the audience, everybody who voted said that the math formula should be provided, that the use of the calculator should be okay. And about 2/3 said that that Tiffany should be tested in a small group. What the case study doesn't say is whether or not she has what I call math anxiety, And a lot of kids who are in residential facilities have a lot of anxiety, so it's very possible that the reason why people said she doesn't need to be tested in a small group is because we didn't talk about the fact that a large group might make her very anxious and distracting.
The other thing that this little case study doesn't give us, and I think it illustrates the need for looking at the whole child and getting as much information as possible, is her reading ability. How is she doing in English language arts? Is she able to, is she passing at that point? So is she being able to read the problems like Devin couldn't? Maybe Tiffany can, and I think the fact that if she has strong English language arts skills, I think that might feed into some of this math anxiety that she's been unsuccessful since 3rd grade. I just can't do it. You know, that kind of thing. I don't know.
Someone did ask on the questions, are the standard and non-standard accommodations both listed on the DESE website?
Yes. Yes, if you look at, I have it actually in front of me, and I'm flipping through some of it just to be sure that I'm giving you accurate information. This document that I mentioned earlier, the requirements for the participation of students with disabilities in MCAS, this is actually included in special ed surrogate parents' resource manuals when they come to the orientation. You might not have the most current if you were trained last year. We just put this 2012-2013 this school year, but it is online. And if you look at, what page is it? I think it starts at, because it's quite extensive, I think it starts at page 14, where it is the list of standard accommodations. And if you keep going through, it's tons of them there. And then on page 20, it's the requirements for the use of non-standard accommodations. And it's more extensive information about what the accommodation is and the criteria required for using it. So, and some special instructions. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed is giving you lots of information. And so I think browsing through this and really thinking about this for your student ahead of time before you come to that IEP meeting would be very beneficial. Even just thinking about, do you think this might work? Do you think this standard accommodation might be helpful, etc. So I am concerned about Tiffany because she has consistently scored it in the warning level in math since 3rd grade. She has not pulled it up. And so be interesting to see what her student growth percentile is in math as well. And really focusing on that. Okay?
Several people have typed in some really nice remarks, which are great. Were very nice. Wendy Tobin, who we are grateful for a lot of comments throughout the webinars. She did agree with me that anxiety is a major issue for most kids that SESPs deal with in congregate care, and even though it may not be specifically stated, that they probably would do better in a smaller individual testing environment. Lynn Powers typed in that since she's in the 10th grade, she'll be in school till at least 19 or 20. So they can try various accommodations and get a neuropsych if one has not been completed. So that's also a good idea.
Yep.
So you kind of learn from the results of the MCAS and apply it across the board for all kinds of different issues.
Good. Yeah. Great. Okay. Want to be sure we have time for the last accommodations for Jesse. He's a 10th grade, he's a 10-year-old boy in 3rd grade taking his MCAS for the first time, and he was adopted from Bulgaria. However, he's now in DCF custody because that adoption was interrupted at 3 years of age. So he's been in DCF care for 7 years. He demonstrates significant delays in speech and language, motor coordination, and in mathematics. He's making slow but steady progress academically, and he is taking his first MCAS this spring. So, Janie.
Okay, we're launching the poll. This one is we're asking if the accommodations are what you feel are the most most appropriate accommodations. Part of this is a test because some of them are non-standard and some of them are standard. So would a number chart be good? Is a scribe being present an appropriate accommodation? Should he be tested in a small group or individually? And should someone read the directions aloud, have them repeated, or highlight them for him? So if you could go ahead and vote, that would be great. We're not really scoring the answers here, so don't worry. And there are no wrong answers.
And with this example, he's in third grade. Okay, so he's taking it for the first time, and there'll be lots to learn about Jesse as a result of this MCAS and how he does. I think, without hearing what the results were, I think there's several ways to look at this for Jesse as I've thought about him in preparation for this. One might be, let's right off the bat suggest an MCAS alt. Let's do a portfolio. Let's see how he's doing and taking a look, and a closer look at how he's learning compared to those learning standards, and not go through the stress of an MCAS, regular MCAS test, even with lots of accommodations. So I don't think that was one of your choices, but that's one that I would think about for him. You know, he has very significant delays in speech and language and math and in motor coordination. I'm not so sure if he's going to be able to do the response as required, even verbally. So let's see what the results are.
Okay, so the results are in, and 100%, and this was a good response. Almost 3/4 of everybody who was listening answered. They all thought a number chart was good.
Yep.
2/3 thought that the scribe should be present. 3/4 thought, or a little bit more, thought that he should be tested in a small group, and 100% of the people felt that he should have the directions read out loud to him, repeated or highlighted. And again, I loved the fact that you said he should be on an alt, because it just makes it a whole lot easier for this poor little guy. But there are some some
thoughts about that?
Well, let me see here. The first one is, can a calculator be used as a non-standard accommodation during the calculation portion of the test if it has been in the IEP? I think the answer to that is that if it's a calculation portion, all the kids use them. Is that right?
Yes, there is a part of the test in which all of them use it, and I'm not so sure that it starts at third grade. I don't know that. Definitely with the older students, but I don't know for sure that there is a calculator usage in third grade, and that's something that we would have to look at in terms of the curriculum. Okay. So
the other comment is that, and this was from Wendy, if in cases like this with the MCAS, I would go for the gold and hope I receive all that is being requested, because this is about a child's graduation, and that's a very good comment. I'm sorry. Wendy said, in cases like this, when the delays are so, can everybody hear me? Yeah. When the delays are so overwhelming, that she would go for the gold, as she said, and hope that she receives everything that's being requested, because this is about a child's graduation.
You know, Wendy, I'm feeling the same way as you, and either going for the gold in terms of asking for all of these individual accommodations, both standard and non-standard, for this little guy, or to really get them to think about the MCAS alt for him as his first experience. So I don't know. The MCAS alt is, I mean, I just really like the idea that it is a collection of work over time, which is just a wonderful kind of concept as opposed to the one-time shot. The disadvantage is that the MCAS alt is not scored the same as the MCAS is. So you don't get the same kinds of numbers, scaled scores. You don't get student growth percentile. Not that a third grader gets student growth percentile, because you have to have at least 1 year or and ideally 2 years to get that to see it over time. But MCAS alt scoring doesn't come up with numbers for the students. It is more general categories about progressing or not progressing. So that's maybe a downside on it for a child like Jesse. So again, we don't have all the information about Jesse. You need to see him as a whole child and where he is as a third grader at the start of this testing to figure out how to proceed. So it would be an interesting decision to make.
A few more comments that I'll share with everyone. Lynn Powers, you said that the lack of development in Bulgaria is a big problem, especially in the orphanages over there, and that they have a good program at Tufts New England Medical for kids that were born in third world countries. I didn't know that. I'm assuming that's a developmental place where they can test all of the different disabilities that might occur because of the trauma in the Bulgarian orphanages, because of the lack of early development. And then Wendy also noted that a motor coordination issue is probably part of it due to his possible trauma history. And let's see, Wendy, you noted that Peggy has a very bright way of looking at the alt. However, not all parents feel that way.
Nor do teachers, Wendy.
Especially if they realize that their kid's not going to get a diploma. So
yeah. Yeah, you're right, absolutely. But again, I would say that he's in third grade. And at the start of his MCAS taking career. So, and it does change. I mean, for those of you who were with us last month, Laura was saying that her daughter did take the alt a few years as a younger student, and then as a high school student, is working on passing the MCAS and planning on graduating, and very excited about that. So there is change, but I think there's a lot of teachers, it's a lot of work, and so that may or may not work for some. I do know some programs actually where, yeah, all the kids are doing all in the classroom, and so they're kind of doing it together, and it's a positive thing.
I do know, and Wendy makes the comment that alt MCAS are great if the educator knows how to do it.
Yep.
And I know that special educators, especially in residential facilities or therapeutic day programs, are much better at it than typical public school educators. And I honestly don't know how many kids in the typical public schools are on alts. I don't know whether we can get that statistic or not. I'm not sure what the training is on the alt.
There's lots of directions.
Okay.
Issued by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, but training, taking the written directions versus actually being able to really do this. But you're right, I think those teachers who are working in either substantially separate classrooms or in residential educational programs, they have more experience in doing it. Yep. Okay, I think that is the last of my slides that I have. I loved the little survey and the feedback. I don't know how other folks felt, but that was helpful and kind of gave us some insights of what you're thinking.
Okay, so what there will be a survey that comes up about how you like this format is when you log off. But we have left some extra time today. And we are going to unmic everyone, Emily. And essentially, I think that means that everybody can have a free-for-all. So if you have any questions or comments, you're all live now, right, Em? Yes. So let's see, is everybody still here? We have 12 people still listening. So we're going to leave these mics open, and everybody be polite, and if anybody has anything, any comments or questions, go ahead and ask.
I had a question about the point value for the test. If you could comment on how we can find out how much each question is worth. So if your child got a 216, how close is that really towards getting a needs improvement at 220?
I think the question was, say your child got a 216, how close is that really to getting the 220? If you go to page 2 and that bar, the graph, that little white line suggests the range by which your student probably would score within the, if they were to take that test another time. And so you're right that 216 is really close, and would the child, so that's, would the child succeed in getting that 220 mark if a child took it again? Certainly students who are at 216 and they're 10th grade, they do need to take retests, okay, to get to the 220 mark. Those students who are just over 220 or above but under the 240 mark, they do not necessarily have to take a retest. They have an educational proficiency plan, and they have to fulfill the requirements of that. The other thing that I thought of was to really, your student scored 216, really to take a look at how students scored on specific questions. Look at the subcontact area, and then also take a look, go online and look at the actual questions. You can see what the questions are and the correct answers, and they also have what's called a scoring guide, so you can see, say the question was worth 4 points, and you can see how they scored 0 points for a response, how they scored 2 points or 3 points or 4 points. And that's kind of helpful information as well, so that the student takes it the next time will do better. Now, remember that if your student scored 216 and is in 5th grade, there's not a retest. There's not, a failing here. It's just a warning. And what you'd be doing is talking to the teacher about how do we help the student get up to 220 and above. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question or a comment? We're trying to make it a little bit more interactive at the end here. Don't be shy.
It's okay.
Okay, so what Emily's pointing out to me is that some people might not have microphones, so if you don't, certainly type in your question the way you were doing it before on the sidebar. I don't see any new ones.
Okay.
Do you have any information as to 10th graders that are taking the MCAS now? If they do not pass the MCAS and Massachusetts switches over to the Parks test, would they retake an MCAS or would they then take the Parks test?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that because we don't know what that PARC test is going to be like. PARC, it's P-A-R-R-C or P-A-R-C-C or something like that. Those initials stand for the test that's going to be used here in Massachusetts based on the Common Core standards. And they are talking about that PARC test being implemented, and I don't know if it's across the entire state or if it's just going to be piloted, 2014 to 2015 school year. Okay, so it's right around the corner, it seems. And the PARC test may, and I don't know the answer to it, and I don't know that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has the answer to this either. The PARC test may absolutely replace the MCAS completely, or it may just supplement it. I don't know. I suspect it's going to be a period of transition, and then they'll make some kind of decision. The PARC test, which is so interesting to me, is that it is going to be computer-based. So schools need to have the capacity for students to take this electronically. And then there is also some discussion amongst the groups that are designing the PARC test about accommodations that can be made for individuals with disabilities on the PARC tests. And there is some question about the non-standard accommodations that Massachusetts allows, whether or not it would be allowed on the PARC test, because the PARC test is not specific to Massachusetts. It's the Common Core standards. It's based on that, and so other states would be using it as well. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answers, but I don't know that anybody has the answers. Has anybody heard anything differently? If you have, share with us, but I have not.
Wendy typed in that it's PARCC, if anyone wants to look it up. PARCC. And that, I guess on their website, I'm thinking, Wendy, it says that it will eventually replace the MCAS.
It will, okay. Eventually.
Okay. And Wendy, thank you for putting in the actual website here, and maybe yeah, Emily can type it in so everybody can see it.
Thank you, Wendy.
She said anytime. No, she says she asked too many questions. Don't you be silly. We love your questions.
Wendy, did it say when the PARC is going to replace it? I don't know that it's decided yet. And I think there may be a time when both are going to be used. I don't know. That's what I heard. Okay.
Thank you, Emily. There's the actual address of the web. So again, we're open here, and feel free. We still have a number of people listening. They might be reading their email at the same time. You never know, but if you do have any questions or comments, now's the time. We have a few more minutes.
Okay, I'll break my silence, ladies. This is Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. That was a very long silence.
I just have a question about the ALT, because I have a lot of parents that have children that are on the spectrum or have Down syndrome that will never be able to take the MCAS or the regular MCAS. And a lot of these parents don't realize until I break the very bad news to them that the child will never graduate with a diploma. And you know, some parents have broken down and cried right in front of me because they do not realize that that's what that means. Now, they don't see Peggy's bright side to that it shows, you know, all of the things that our children can do. And that really is the bright side of it. But it takes them a while. It's like having the child all over again with the disability, and you have to go through all of the emotional roller coaster all over again. And, you know, I think that the Department of Ed doesn't really stress this enough to parents. And, you know, I've been to the Federation a few years ago where they were asking parents' input on the changes of the MCAS, you know, the coming up MCAS changes. And I was one of the parents that attended, and I continued to stress, you don't make this known well enough that parents that have children with significant disabilities, that have mental retardation, and that part will never change, will never be able to graduate with a diploma. They need to make parents aware of that so that, you know, they can try to help these children before they find this out when they're in 10th grade, and then they realize that they're never going to graduate with a diploma because they didn't take the regular MCAS. So anyway, my question was, how is it that a parent or a special education advocate track the the progress based on an MCAS alt in comparison to a regular alt or where other children are, especially when the gap is so wide that there's no way the child's ever going to catch up to their own age.
Wendy, I hear you and I commend you actually for your sharing with parents and the realization that the MCAS alt is not going to always lead to a graduation. However, it can lead to graduation for some students. And I do know some students who have taken the MCAS alt, and it has been deemed as proficient, and they have graduated with the Massachusetts high school diploma. Now, these were students who had significant physical disabilities and visual impairments, but did not have the cognitive difficulties of other students. So they were able to pass and get a high school diploma on the MCAS alt. So it's not impossible. But there are certainly situations, and I know that you have been working with families in which this is what you had to share with them. For some families, my thought is, one is that if they're doing the alt with their students in the younger grades, is there a way to progress to taking the regular MCAS with accommodations, okay, to change? And that's something to kind of consider and go case by case. And then lastly, your question about how to compare the results on the alt from year by year. You're right, they have very broad categories of results. I mean, it's like the student is progressing. And it's really getting up to a certain level that is not the match of what their peers are learning in the general curriculum. However, the alt is supposedly based on the general curriculum, so that they're asking to collect work that reflects what's going on in the general curriculum. So it's a tough situation. I think that it has to be dealt, again, case by case, with the parents sitting down with the team and saying, look, if this is the results from the portfolio from this year to this year, what's the same, what's different? Have we seen student growth? Have we seen any student growth? You're not going to be able to get a growth percentile, but you can talk about growth. Have we seen it? Okay?
Yes, thank
I'm sorry, I can't answer it more specific because I don't know that there is a specific.
I know. I think it also varies depending on the educator, like I mentioned before. Some educators know exactly what they're doing with these alts because they've been doing it for a while, and just because they're good at it. And, you know, it's understandable. And, you know, to be honest, my child, her first alt was last year, and the educator, you know, she is fairly young, and it's clear she didn't know really what to do. And, you know, my daughter's scores were just, you know, you could tell they were just not accurate. And
not accurate,
a lot of it was being used by a rubber stamper. So she'd take the rubber stamp and, you know, they'd ask her which one was which, and then she'd stamp it. Well, that shows me nothing. So, but anyway, it's disappointing in many ways, and it's just not, I think the Department of Ed is just not handling that particular thing very well. You know, it's possible because it's a very low percentage of our kids with significant.
It is a low percentage, yep. You know, Wendy, one of the things I was just thinking is that it would be kind of cool to have at the Federation, and I think it'd be very valuable for some parents, not all, because as you said, a low percentage of kids take the alt, but to have a workshop by someone who knows how to do these well. I mean, if anybody hears of a special educator or a system that does the alt very well, that would be really, I think, very interesting to have either as a workshop or at a conference or some way to get that information out to families so they know what to ask for, what to look for, to have that conversation so that parents are not like you, Wendy, where this is not a true reflection of my daughter's work and what she can do.
Yeah,
You know?
I know. Yep.
So anybody know of, we'll look, and if you hear of anybody, we'll try to, I think that would be great.
And I know also, this is Janie, that there is a discussion, at least in the Boston Public School, for different types of diplomas.
Yeah.
Now, Boston Public School can't make that decision on their own. They think they can, but they they would love to have their own diploma and then, you know, supplemented by state diploma or whatever. But I think the whole idea of a diploma means different things to different people. And when they say the state diploma, it means something different for kids typical kids than it does for kids that have disabilities. Dee Springer just typed in that she had some questions about what would be good accommodations for a kid who had working memory issues. And again, working memory issues to me mean that it doesn't stay on their desktop for long, and usually not long enough to retrieve it and use it appropriately in testing. So Peggy's flipping through her book here.
Well, I just wanted, actually what I wanted to see is if it's standard or non-standard, you know, and I think that's really very important. But I'm thinking about, say in math, the formulas, for example, right? A student for working memory would not remember those formulas. And so I got to check to see, you know, when is it a standard and when is it not a standard.
I believe that's a standard.
Yeah, I think so. I know you were surprised by that. So I think it depends on the area being tested. I know, is it in vocabulary as well? Do students with a poor working memory have problems with vocabulary and new vocabulary?
It depends on the learning disability, because somebody just asked for the ELAs. It's also the ELA area. Yeah, it can be. It's a matter of, certainly spelling would come into that. Reading comprehension, if there are working memory problems for those two areas, it's going to impact performance on a test. Okay.
Spelling, just so you know, the spelling is only counted in writing prompts, those writing samples. That's in 4th, 7th, I think, and 10th. And that's the only time it's really counted. The other time it's not. Same with grammar. So that's a help for some. Yeah, only those, you know, yeah. It's not counted in the math problems, the spelling and the grammar. So for good or for bad, there's mixed feelings about that. But anyway.
Reading comprehension is a big problem for kids working processing memory issues, because they can't retain what they've read and it kind of goes away. So take a look, everybody that's on still, at the accommodations online. There are hundreds of them for all different kinds of issues. And my sense is that if you've come up with one that might work, and it's not specifically stated in the standard accommodations, all you have to do is kind of ask for it. What is the process for that, Peggy, for getting non-standard accommodations approved? Is it a long process? I know it has to go through the DESE, right?
Yes.
Wendy just said that text to audio and reading is one that works well, and that's, of course, a very good one.
Yeah. That's what actually, it's interesting because the non-standard ones, when you look at it, starting on page 20 of this document, it really is about reading comprehension.
Yes.
And it is reading aloud, it is an electronic reader, it is signing for, you know, signing for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing.
That's a non-standard? Huh, that's interesting.
The reading comprehension part.
For reading comprehension.
For reading comprehension, which is
oh, okay.
nice. And so, you know, it's sort of like the spell check as well for those parts of the writing prompts that they're supposed to be. So it's sort of like, are they getting assistance on those parts of the test that are, you know, testing the spelling or testing the calculation piece or testing your ability to understand the reading?
So I heard you say that the new test, the Common Core test, the CARC test, will be all on computers. And I would think that that would alleviate a lot of the issues for certainly spelling and grammar, because it would run, I would think that you could do the run through the spell check and the grammar checks, but
if it's available to you when you take the test.
Yeah. But it'll be very interesting to see how this all
Sure
evolves. All right. Anybody else? We are just about out of time. We have about 5 more minutes. We still have most of our people here, so it must be a good discussion. So a couple of more minutes if you come up with anything else. And again, as Peggy said, if you have any questions after we go off the air, don't hesitate to call me or Peggy at the Federation. When it comes to MCAS, I will certainly give you Peggy, because I don't know very much about it. My kids graduated just barely at the very, very beginning of the MCAS process, and I'm pretty sure that they gave my son the answers, because there was no way he was going to ever pass the math MCAS, because he just could not remember to add from one day to the other.
Yeah, at the very beginning, when they were doing MCAS, I mean, they were pretty loosey-goosey about it. They're not anymore. Right. Oh, my. No. Very strict protocol to follow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next month, actually, we have not thought about what our topic will be for the webinar. If anybody's out there and wants to email me and let me know what they think should be something we should talk about, that would be great.
Do you want to mention our next in-person?
Yes, we are going to have Dr. Joseph Moldover come and speak live at the Federation on April 30th from 6:30 to 8:30. It will be like the one that Nancy Rappaport did a couple of months ago. We will have it on the webinar also. And we might actually have a video this time. I don't know. We'll have to see how John's working on that. But I'm very excited that he'll be here. He will be talking about developmental evaluations. So that's going to be more of a, not just neuropsychs, but all kinds of testing for kids. And I asked him to focus on social emotional testing, because I know a lot of people have had questions, SESPs have had questions about why the schools are not accepting the emotional disability as a category for an IEP.
We know that people are interested in testing. On our website, when we take a look at what are the pages and the hits on our website, it's always on testing. So we're going to try to focus on that a little bit more, and starting April 30th.
Right. And unfortunately, it's the big question, of course, is there a test for trauma? And can you tell me whether this child has been traumatized? And we're not quite there yet for testing, although I guess people are working on it. But it has so much symptomology that it's pretty hard to specifically say that a child has what kind of trauma and how severe it is. Okay, so I think we're done. So I would like to thank everybody, and don't forget that survey. And we will see you next month, and thank you so very much.
Thank you.